Some goodbyes linger, echoing not in words, but in the silent ache of a missing presence. 7 years ago, we said a final farewell to a legend, a hero whose name was etched in stone and sorrow into our hearts. We thought we understood loss, the irreversible finality of it. But what if the deepest sacrifices aren't always visible? What if the greatest stories aren't just about those who fall, but about those who choose to disappear, to become a ghost, all for a cause far greater than themselves? Tonight on a quiet tarmac, the impossible walks into the light, shattering everything they thought they knew about sacrifice, and proving that some legends refuse to stay buried. They simply find their way back home. The sharp rebuke cut through the easy laughter of the gathered squadron. "Show some respect! That's Ghost Talon's flight jacket!" An older officer snapped at the young pilot who had been chuckling just a moment before. The younger man rolled his eyes. "Relax. Just some fan-plane dress-up. She's been KIA for 7 years," he said with a smirk. But the smirk didn't last long. As the woman stepped forward into the glow of the overhead lights, all laughter died, swallowed by a stunned silence. Her face came into view, clear, unmistakable, and utterly impossible. A ghost had just walked out of the shadows. Captain Evelyn Rhodess, call sign Ghost Talon, once the pride of Falcon Squadron 21, now stood before them, alive. At 39, she had once been the most gifted and unpredictable pilot in the unit, known for her precision strikes, her uncanny ability to appear where she wasn't expected, and disappear before enemy radar could lock on. Her missions were mostly classified, her actions whispered about in hallways and briefing rooms. To her squadron, she'd become more than human. She was legend. 7 years ago, that legend was cut short. While flying deep into hostile territory on a covert op, her F-22 Raptor was downed by surface-to-air missiles. Rescue teams had combed through the wreckage for weeks. There was no signal, no flight recorder, and most hauntingly, no body. After exhaustive searches yielded only debris, the military had no choice but to declare her KIA. The funeral was dignified, the kind reserved for heroes. Hundreds came. Her name was carved into the black granite memorial wall at Falcon Air Base. Her call sign permanently retired. Ghost Talon would fly no more. Or so everyone believed. Tonight marked the founding anniversary of Falcon Squadron 21, a night to honor the past, toast the present, and remember the fallen. The tarmac glowed under hangar floodlights, and rows of pilots stood with heads slightly bowed in solemn unity. Major Harris, the current squadron commander, held a glass of whiskey aloft, the amber liquid catching the light. He stood before the memorial wall, where names etched in black granite caught the golden reflection, none more prominent than Evelyn Rhodess. "Tonight we celebrate the birth of Falcon 21, Harris began, his voice strong and steady. "And we remember those who gave everything for it, especially the best among us, the one who taught us what it meant to vanish like wind and strike like lightning. Tonight, we raise our glass to Captain Evelyn Ghost Talon Rhodess." A unified cry followed, "To Ghost Talon!" And then it happened. From the shadows near a weathered old maintenance hangar, a figure emerged. She moved with calm purpose, like someone returning to a place she never truly left. The flight jacket she wore was unmistakable. Patches faded, edges worn, but the insignia of Falcon 21 still proud on the sleeve. It wasn't some replica or tribute costume. This jacket had history woven into its seams. Dust from deserts no one talked about. Scratches from cockpits that never officially flew. Her gait was steady, shoulders squared in the way only pilots who've been tested can carry themselves. There was a quiet authority in her movements. Her presence, almost ethereal, tugged at something in the memory of those who had once flown beside her. Her hair had grown and age had carved new lines into her face. But it was her eyes, the same unwavering intensity that told the truth before anyone could speak it. Most of the younger pilots were still transfixed by the toast, unaware of what was unfolding just behind them. To them, Ghost Talon was a tale passed down, a myth used to inspire discipline and daring, someone whose name lived only in training videos and war stories. But among the older crew, recognition stirred. Master Sergeant Rodriguez, one of the few remaining who had flown beside her, slowly set down his glass. His breath caught in his throat. The impossible had just become real. And deep down, he already knew Ghosts don't stay buried forever. Some of them come back to finish what they started. The chill that prickles the skin on the backs of their necks is unmistakable. It's the same sensation, part instinct, part fear, that used to sweep over them right before Ghost Talon would break radio silence and appear, seemingly out of nowhere, to shift the tide of a mission. A presence that felt like it moved through shadows, defying logic and expectation, drawing nearer with quiet force. Now, that same unseen current is stirring again, carried on the rhythmic echo of boots striking concrete in the still night. The figure, draped in the mystery of darkness, keeps moving across the tarmac. With every step, she closes the distance between memory and revelation, drawing nearer to the edge where myth bleeds into fact. 7 years have passed, 7 long years filled with grieving what was lost, preserving what was remembered, and believing that some things, no matter how bright, were gone forever. But in less than a minute, Falcon Squadron 21 will face the unimaginable truth. Some legends never vanish. Some ghosts return. Among the gathered squadron, the first to see her is Lieutenant Jake Morrison, a brash young pilot still fresh to Falcon 21 with just 8 months under his belt. He elbows his wingman with a smirk and nods toward the lone figure. "Who the hell let a civilian wander in here this late?" he mutters with a note of annoyance. "And would you look at that? She's wearing one of our jackets. That's stolen valor if I've ever seen it." Lieutenant Sarah Chen narrows her eyes through the glare of the hangar lights, trying to make out the approaching figure. Maybe she's family to someone. That jacket doesn't look fake. It fits too naturally. Morrison snorts. "Probably just some flight groupie who snagged surplus gear online. The nerve, showing up during our memorial wearing Ghost Talon patches like it means something." Their whispered exchange stirs murmurs from the other pilots nearby. Younger members of Falcon 21, those who'd only heard stories about Ghost Talon, never flown beside her, saw only what was in front of them. An unapproved outsider, clad in a flight jacket she hadn't earned, intruding on a sacred remembrance. "Somebody should call security," a voice suggests. "This is way out of line." As Evelyn walks onward, unwavering and silent, fragments of their doubts and judgments reach her ears. Years in deep covert assignments have sharpened more than her reflexes. They've trained her to read people from a whisper, to catch intent in the tone of a voice. And there it is now, cutting through the air. Suspicion, dismissal, and above all, disbelief. She doesn't blame them. How could they possibly accept this moment as real? The dead don't simply walk back onto a military base, but hearing herself casually labeled a groupie, accused of stealing what she had bled to earn, pulls a dry, bitter smile to her face. She remembers being that young once, cocky and too quick to draw lines between truth and fiction. Now the irony stings. The very unit she once led into the fire now sees her as nothing but an outsider trespassing on their legacy. At the memorial wall, Major Harris, Falcon 21's current squadron commander, finally senses the ripple of distraction among his pilots. He turns from the names engraved in stone to locate the source of the disturbance. Through the dim lighting, his eyes settle on the lone figure. Something about the silhouette tugs at his memory, the poise, the command in every step. It's not clear, but it feels familiar. "What's going on?" Harris asks quietly, voice low in deference to the fallen. Morrison steps up promptly, his tone all business. "Sir, there's a civilian on the tarmac wearing flight gear. I can remove her, if you give the word." Harris narrows his eyes, examining the figure more closely. The way she walks, it's not rehearsed, it's not performative. There's a natural authority in her gait, the kind you don't fake. It's earned. He doesn't have an answer yet, but instinct holds him back. "Stand down, Morrison," Harris says, his voice calm but firm. "Let's see what she's here for." But Morrison isn't ready to let go of the moment. Eager to show initiative, maybe even impress the senior officers, he takes a few steps toward the woman. His voice raises slightly, more command than courtesy. "Ma'am, this is a restricted area. You're going to need to leave immediately." Still, Evelyn says nothing. She doesn't flinch, doesn't slow. Her feet keep moving with the same even rhythm. She's getting closer now, walking fully into the glare of the floodlights. And in that bright wash of white, the truth begins to flicker into view. That jacket she's wearing, it's not just standard issue. It's lived in. The creases, the weathering, the wear. It's authentic in the way no replica could ever be. It's the real thing. And so is she. The cockpit replicas displayed inside the hangars weren't props. They were the real deal. Each weathered patch stitched onto the worn flight suits had seen actual combat, soaked in sweat and adrenaline from missions flown under hostile skies. These weren't reconstructions. They were ghosts of the past, stitched in fabric and faded thread. Lieutenant Jake Morrison took another step forward, his tone sharper this time, his fingers twitching toward the sidearm at his hip. "Ma'am, I need you to stop right there and identify yourself," he ordered, voice firm. That was the moment she stepped into the light, completely and unmistakably. She didn't just appear. She materialized like something pulled from memory and brought to life. Her features emerged from the shadows with the clarity of an old photograph in the final seconds of development. The cheekbones were unmistakable, sharp and defiant. The eyes, piercing and unrelenting, were the same ones that had haunted enemy cockpits across 3 war zones. And above her left eyebrow, a thin, familiar scar, the legacy of a long-ago training mishap, remained untouched by time. The whiskey glass Major Harris had been nursing slipped from his fingers and exploded on the concrete like a pistol shot. The crash cut through the hush like thunder. And all conversation halted. Every movement froze. The tarmac itself seemed to hold its breath. "Holy shit," someone muttered, barely more than a breath. Morrison stood paralyzed, caught mid-motion, hand hovering uselessly near his weapon. Color drained from his face as if his entire system had short-circuited, trying to make sense of the woman in front of him. Lieutenant Sarah Chen, standing just behind him, instinctively reached for his arm, not to hold him back, but to keep herself from collapsing. That can't be," Morrison stammered, the swagger in his voice gone, dissolved by disbelief. A few feet away, Master Sergeant Rodriguez took an unsteady step back. The man had flown with her on her final mission, 7 years ago. His face had gone ghost white. His shoulders sagged beneath an invisible weight, and his hands trembled uncontrollably. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. Ghost Talon." And like a lit match dropped in dry grass, the name ignited across the crowd. Ghost Talon. It wasn't said loudly, it didn't have to be. The shock was electric, surging from one person to the next. Pilots who'd just been laughing seconds earlier now stood in stunned silence, their gazes locked on the figure that defied every known truth. Veterans squinted through disbelief, slowly picking out details they'd never thought they'd see again. Things they'd believed lost to the past. The curve of Herjo, the way she stood, weight on the back foot, arms relaxed but ready. That impossible voice. From the control tower, a voice broke through the base radio, brittle with disbelief. "All units, be advised. We have an unidentified individual on Tarmac 7. Do not, I repeat, do not engage. Identity verification in progress. Stand by for further instructions." But the calm in the operator's voice was betrayed by the tremor underneath. Even he had already guessed what he was seeing. The message, and the miracle it carried, was already racing through the base's internal channels. Ghost Talon, she's here. The pilot they'd lost. The warrior whose remains were never recovered. The one who was listed as KIA. The one whose memorial they'd just stood beside, whose name was etched into stone, revered in silence. She was standing right there, whole, alive. And then she spoke. Her voice hadn't changed. It was that same even, confident tone that once made pilots straighten in their chairs and follow her lead through hell itself. "Evening, Falcon 21, she said, cool as a midnight flight. "Sorry I'm late for tonight's party." The silence that followed was almost painful. It wasn't just quiet. It was the kind of silence that carried the weight of 7 years of loss, pain, and belief. They had buried her, mourned her. They had raised their glasses and carved her name in granite. They had remembered her in ceremonies, honored her memory with medals, and whispered her name with reverence. And now here she was, walking back into their world with 4 simple words that cracked the very foundation of their understanding. Some stood frozen, unsure whether to run or salute. Some felt tears rising unbidden. They were standing in front of a memorial, only to have the ghost they mourned walk up behind them. If you've ever felt a legend brush past you or believed in heroes returning when they're needed most, this was that moment. Within minutes, Falcon Air Base was alive with a different kind of energy. Rumors morphed into fact as word traveled through ranks and corridors. Emergency protocols kicked in as stunned personnel tried to confirm what they were seeing with their own eyes. Inside his office, Colonel Williams was halfway through a mission readiness report when the call came in. The voice on the other end was uneven, trying and failing to remain professional. "Sir," the duty officer said, "we have a situation on Tarmac 7. A woman claiming to be Captain Evelyn Rhodess has just appeared at the memorial." The colonel's coffee mug slipped from his grip and shattered on the floor. He had been at her funeral. He had personally handed the folded flag to her sister. He had mourned her with the kind of sorrow only commanders carry when they lose one of their best. "That's impossible," he whispered, more to himself than to the officer. "Run full identity verification," he ordered, standing suddenly. "Get me her classified file, now." Already, base intelligence had begun pulling her records. "But sir, the woman out there on the tarmac, she knows our squadron's protocol. Every move she makes, every gesture, she's not pretending. The flight suit she wears, the patches, the boots, all regulation and weathered by time. The veterans who once flew beside her, they're saying it's really her." Inside the base's secure intelligence center, the atmosphere is electric with disbelief. Analysts race against layers of redacted files and encrypted clearance levels, their fingers flying over keyboards, breath caught between questions and fear. 7 years' worth of sealed records open like a Pandora's box. What they uncover sends ripples of shock through the command hierarchy. Captain Evelyn Rhodess, call sign Ghost Talon, didn't die as officially reported. Her file, hidden beneath presidential-level clearance, continues. Not ends. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Walsh, the base's intelligence officer, reads the screen again, unable to blink. Her voice drops to a whisper, barely audible to her deputy beside her, and, "Oh my God, she was never KIA. She was captured and then rescued 6 months later." Her deputy, equally stunned, murmurs, "Why wasn't this ever debriefed? Where's the report?" Walsh swallows. "Because the moment she was extracted, she was pulled into a black ops program so covert, it doesn't even officially exist. Her death was a strategic deception to protect the operations she was about to begin. For 7 years, she's been in deep cover, moving through denied territories, running missions no one outside a need-to-know circle would ever hear about." Back on the tarmac, the tension remains taut as piano wire. The air smells of jet fuel and disbelief. Major Harris, his heart pounding in his chest like a war drum, walks toward her slowly, as though she might disappear if he gets too close. The closer he gets, the more impossible it seems. But her eyes, the way she looks at him, it's her. The same calm, unflinching stare he'd seen so many times in pre-flight briefings and mission debriefs. His voice breaks as he speaks. "Evelyn, is it really you?" She gives him the faintest, familiar smile. "Hello, Harris. You've done a good job with the squadron. I've been watching the mission reports." He stares at her, confusion and raw emotion written across his face. "Watching? But we buried you. I delivered your eulogy. Your sister sobbed on my shoulder." "I know," she says gently. "I was there, in the back, dressed in civilian clothes. I couldn't stay away, but I couldn't tell you either." The words slam into him like a shockwave. He staggers a half step, almost as if physically struck. "You were at your own funeral?" She nods, eyes glistening but never wavering. "It was the hardest thing I've ever done, standing 20 feet away from my family, my friends, watching them break down over me, and being powerless to comfort them." Behind him, Master Sergeant Rodriguez, older now, salt in his beard, years of duty carved into his face, had stood frozen in place ever since he recognized her. Now his voice finds life again, shaking with memory. "The mission in Syria, when you were shot down. We searched for you, for weeks." She looks at him, pain and gratitude mingling in her expression. "I was captured 12 hours after the crash. They moved me to a black site off the grid. 6 months later, a joint task force finally extracted me. By that point, the Department of Defense had already written my death into the official record. They decided it was too useful to correct. From the crowd, Lieutenant Jake Morrison, young, brash, and only minutes earlier, openly skeptical, approaches her slowly, eyes low, voice laden with shame. Ma'am, I want to apologize. I didn't know. Evelyn studies him, this young pilot full of conviction and pride, and she sees a reflection of her younger self. You couldn't have known, Lieutenant, and you did exactly what you were supposed to do. You protected the ceremony, the memorial. That's what Ghost Talon would have wanted. But you are Ghost Talon, he says quietly. I was, for 7 years, she replies. But since then, I've been someone else. A ghost, not just in name, but in truth. I couldn't exist, not on record, not to you, not to anyone. I couldn't have friends, couldn't come home. Tonight is the first time I've been Evelyn Rhodess again, since the day I died. A wave of silence rolls through the squadron just as headlights cut across the tarmac. Colonel Williams arrives, flanked by a full security detail. Every soldier instinctively tenses until the colonel steps forward, looks at the woman before him, and raises his hand to halt his men. He knows. He's read enough classified briefings to piece this together. The details may be redacted, but the truth is standing in front of him, alive. He steps closer and says, formally, Captain Rhodess. Then, in a voice softened by reverence and awe, Ghost Talon. Welcome home. Evelyn breathes in deeply. Thank you, sir. I know this raises questions, a lot of them. Ones I suspect you can't fully answer, he says. Some I can. The program I was part of, it's been dissolved. The missions are over. The people I was protecting are safe. And for the first time in 7 years, Evelyn Rhodess is no longer just a name on a file or a tombstone. She's real again. Around her, her old squadron begins to grasp the enormity of what's unfolding. This isn't just a reunion. It's a revelation, a resurrection. Not just of a comrade, but of a hero who surrendered not only her life, but her entire identity to protect them, and missions they'll never even know existed. Major Harris turns his gaze toward the memorial wall where her name, Ghost Talon, Captain Evelyn Rhodess, is etched into the stone. His voice is hoarse. What do we do about that? Leave it, Evelyn said firmly, her voice quiet but unshakable. That name belongs on the wall. The woman who died 7 years ago earned that place. Her eyes didn't waver, her stance unflinching, as though speaking those words anchored her in something real. She gave up everything, her name, her connections, even the right to be remembered as herself, for her country. That sacrifice means something. She deserves that spot. Rodriguez, standing beside her with a trembling jaw, blinked rapidly and wiped the tears that had gathered in the corners of his eyes. There was pain in his face, but something else too. Pride. So who are you now? He asked, voice raw. Evelyn turned toward him, the edge of her expression softening for the first time since stepping back onto the base. I'm someone who gets to come home now, she said gently. Someone who gets to see familiar faces again. Someone who might actually sleep in the same bed for more than 3 nights in a row. It was then that Lieutenant Sarah Chen, silent until now, finally found her voice. She stepped forward, her posture respectful, eyes filled with something close to wonder. Ma'am, all the stories we heard about Ghost Talon, the missions no one could believe, the perfect flight record, were they all true? Evelyn paused, considering carefully. The question hung in the air like a delicate wire, taut with hope and doubt. Every pilot in this squadron, she said at last, has capabilities they haven't yet realized. Each of you can do things no one would think possible when the mission calls for it. The only real difference between me and you is this. My impossible missions happened in places where no one was allowed to know they ever took place. She let her gaze drift across the room, scanning each face in turn. Some were familiar, old comrades who knew the weight of silence. Others were young, fresh, curious, standing on the edge of a truth they'd only imagined. All of them were looking at her with the same expression, awe mingled with a dawning understanding. I've been a ghost for 7 years, she said quietly. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, I finally get to be human again. Colonel Williams stepped forward then, the sound of his boots sharp against the hangar floor. In his hands he carried a document, official, stamped with the weight of the Pentagon behind it. His voice was formal, but carried a warmth that belied the ceremony. Captain Evelyn Rhodess, he began, on behalf of the United States Air Force, and with full authorization from the Department of Defense, I am here to reinstate your military status. Along with it, I am honored to present you with the Distinguished Service Cross for actions that, though classified, were instrumental in safeguarding American lives and strategic interests abroad. The room stood still as his words echoed in the air. What had begun as a memorial for the fallen had shifted into something entirely different, a celebration of a living legend, one who had sacrificed more than her life. She had given up the most human things, her name, her connections, her place in the world, to fight in shadows. And now, as the squadron stood in formation, saluting the return of Ghost Talon, they realized they were witnessing something rare and profound. This wasn't just the return of a pilot, it was the return of someone who had never really left them. She'd been there all along, watching from beyond the edge of visibility, carrying burdens none of them could have imagined. Tonight, the memorial wall didn't gain another name etched in solemn honor. Instead, it gained something perhaps even more powerful, a living guardian stepping out of the darkness at last. The atmosphere at Falcon Air Base shifted in the hours that followed, as though the wind itself carried the change. Where once there had been quiet reverence, now there was electricity, movement, a deep emotional buzz that filled every corridor. Words spread like wildfire. Hangars echoed with whispers and wide-eyed retellings. Barracks lit up with murmurs of disbelief and excitement. From the control tower to the mess hall, one message pulsed through every way. Ghost Talon has come back from the dead. Colonel Williams walked beside Evelyn as they moved through the facility that had once been her entire world. Some parts still felt achingly familiar. The scent of jet fuel lingering in the hangars, the glint of polished metal under fluorescent lights. The F-22 Raptors remained in their neat rows, unchanged in silhouette, though a few newer models stood alongside them. But the faces? Most were new, young pilots, wide-eyed and eager, who had only ever known Ghost Talon as a whisper, a story told in hushed tones and reverent glances at the wall. Your old office is still intact, Williams said as they passed the Squadron Operations Center. Harris didn't let anyone touch it, said it was too important. She stepped closer, peering through the glass, her breath caught. Inside, time had stopped. Her flight helmet still rested on the desk, the call sign Ghost Talon clearly emblazoned across it. The nameplate had never been taken down. Charts and mission photos she'd pinned up 7 years ago were still there, untouched, a quiet testament to the work that had once filled her days. It was like stepping into a shrine, not to a fallen hero, but to a phantom who had somehow become legend. As she continued the walkthrough, she encountered faces that lit up at the sight of her, hands that reached out in greeting, voices that thanked her not just for what she'd done, but for returning. Every department, every rank carried traces of her legacy. The maintenance crews still used the same inspection protocols she had created. The instructors taught flight maneuvers she had refined under live fire. The analysts worked with assessment models she had developed under deep cover operations. Master Sergeant Rodriguez, now the senior enlisted advisor for the squadron, remained by her side, offering stories and updates about people they'd both known. Some had moved on, retired, transferred. Some, like Johnson, had been lost. But others still carried the torch she'd once held alone. And now Evelyn walked among them not as a ghost, but as something far more enduring. Onishi. A symbol of what sacrifice truly meant. A pilot reborn, Thompson had earned the rank of colonel just last year. Martinez, having stepped away from active duty, opened a modest but growing flight school in the quiet plains of Texas. And then there was Johnson. The moment his name left Rodriguez's lips, he faltered. His voice cracked, suspended between memory and grief. Johnson never came back. Afghanistan claimed him 3 years ago. Evelyn stood still, her face unreadable, but her silence heavy with weight. Each update settled over her like dust on a forgotten frame. Promotions, farewells, new beginnings, final endings. 7 years of life had surged forward without her, unstoppable and unrelenting. People had moved on. Careers flourished or closed their final chapters. Bonds deepened or dissolved. The world had spun ahead while she had stayed hidden, silent, surviving in the shadows. Gradually, as the hours passed and the tension eased, the younger pilots began to soften. Though the reverence in their eyes hadn't quite faded, their unease was melting into something closer to cautious admiration. They'd grown up hearing her name whispered in stories and footnotes, never expecting to see her in flesh and blood. And now, here she was, Ghost Talon, real and standing among them. Even Lieutenant Jake Morrison, whose earlier skepticism had bordered on disrespect, approached during a lull in the tour. His posture was hesitant, unsure if he was crossing a line. "Ma'am," he began, voice low but steady, "I keep thinking about what you said earlier, about protecting the ceremony and the memorial. How did you know? I mean, how could you be sure what Ghost Talon would have wanted?" Evelyn didn't respond right away. She looked at him, truly looked, weighing his question with the same seriousness she gave every decision. Finally, she said, "Because Ghost Talon never really died, Morrison. She just learned how to live differently. Every day, for the past 7 years, I asked myself, what would the pilot who earned a place on that memorial wall do? That became my compass. Every choice I made for her." Lieutenant Sarah Chen had been listening nearby and stepped closer, curiosity flickering in her eyes. "What was it like," she asked, "living as someone else for so long?" Evelyn let the silence stretch again, but this one felt more personal. "Lonely," she admitted at last. "But also strangely freeing. When you don't officially exist, you stop worrying about promotions or medals. You live only for the mission. Every decision is about keeping others safe. That becomes the only thing that matters, getting people home." As dusk gathered and the final notes of sunlight stretched across the base, the squadron regrouped in the ready room. There was no mission briefing, no tactical charts or aerial maps. This meeting was something else entirely. It was about finding space for history, for healing, for Ghost Talon to take her place not as a myth, but as one of their own. Major Harris stood before the crowd, voice calm but deeply felt. "Today we learned that losing someone doesn't always mean they're gone," he said. "Sometimes it means they've been carrying something invisible, fighting battles we'll never understand, protecting us in ways we couldn't imagine." His eyes met Evelyn's. "Ghost Talon, you've been watching over this squadron for 7 years and we never knew. Now we want to know how we can watch over you." The room rose in thunderous applause, an offering of respect and gratitude long overdue. Evelyn held up a hand to quiet them. When the room settled, she said, "You already have. Every mission you've flown safely, every pilot you've brought home, every tradition you've upheld, you've been honoring something far bigger than any one person. That's what I've been trying to protect all these years." From the back of the room, an older mechanic stood up. His face was weathered, his hands still bearing the grime of a long day, but his voice was steady. "Ma'am," he asked, "what happens now? Are you staying?" Evelyn scanned the room. Familiar eyes, new faces, memories and futures colliding in the same breath. For the first time in years, she had the freedom to choose. "I'm home," she said, "and I'm not leaving again." In a world that so often measures heroism by medals, ceremonies, and headlines, some of the most enduring legends are born in the gaps between what's known and what's never spoken aloud. They carry burdens that can't be written into reports, make sacrifices that will never be publicized, and fight not for glory, but so others can live their lives in peace. Evelyn Rhodess knew that truth better than anyone. True service isn't about being celebrated. It's about being willing to disappear so others never have to. 6 months later, she stood once again in uniform, not as a ghost, but as the chief instructor for Falcon Squadron 21. The Pentagon had offered her a secure desk job, complete with honors and a quiet path to retirement. She turned it down. Her place was in the cockpit. Her mission was clear: prepare the next generation for the same impossible choices she had faced. Lieutenant Morrison, once the skeptic, now stood as one of her most committed students. On his desk, among manuals and mission logs, sat a single photo, not of his family, not of himself, but of Ghost Talon's name, etched in silver on the memorial wall. To him, it was more than a name. It was a reminder. The memorial wall, Simo, he told a group of fresh recruits during their first orientation, isn't just for the fallen. It's for the ones who were willing to fall and chose to keep standing instead. They were the kind of people who didn't just accept the risk of dying for a cause greater than themselves. They embraced the even heavier burden of being erased entirely, of becoming ghosts for the sake of something more important. At Falcon Air Base, that truth is honored with a tradition born not from battle cries, but from quiet resilience, the living memorial. Every year on the anniversary of Talon's return, the base holds a solemn ceremony. It's not a celebration filled with fanfare or visible accolades, but a tribute, an acknowledgement of those who operate in silence, whose bravery remains classified, whose stories rarely make it into history books. These are the ones whose sacrifices are buried deep beneath layers of secrecy, sometimes only uncovered decades later, if at all. Captain Evelyn Rhodess, call sign Ghost Talon, stands at the center of these ceremonies. She's no longer just a legend who came back. She's become the voice for those who never could. When she speaks, she doesn't recount tales for glory or applause. She shares carefully vetted, declassified fragments of the hidden world she once navigated, stories that shimmer with the weight of duty and the quest of unseen wars. When you raise your right hand and swear in, you know you might have to die for your country, she tells the audience of young servicemen and women, their faces a mix of nerves and awe. But no one warns you that you might be asked to live for it in ways that break you from the inside out. That you'll be asked to keep living, even when it feels like everything that made you you has been stripped away. And if you really believe in the mission, if it means more than your name or your face or your comfort, you'll do it anyway. As she says this, her fingers lightly brush the space on her flight suit where the Ghost Talon patch once was. It's gone now, replaced by the insignia of an instructor. Yet the memory of it lingers like a scar, a reminder of who she was and what she still carries. Some legends are immortalized on stone, etched into walls where the fallen are remembered. Others, like Evelyn, step back into cockpits and classrooms, dedicating themselves to shaping a new generation. Pilots and warriors who might never have to face what she did, but who will be ready if they must. The cadets and junior officers who gather to listen aren't just hearing a speech. They're absorbing a truth too heavy for textbooks. They sit quietly, locked into every word, many of them feeling the early stirrings of what it might mean to serve in the shadows, to choose service over spotlight, duty over legacy. And always, before she ends, Evelyn offers them one final truth. Her voice lowers, not for drama, but reverence. The greatest heroes, she says, aren't the ones whose names are remembered. They're the ones whose names were never known to begin with. The ones who chose the mission, knowing it would cost them everything else. Near the base's memorial wall, there are now two plaques. One bears the names of those who died in the line of duty, their sacrifices marked in stone, honored for all to see. The second was added after Evelyn's return, carved not with names but with purpose, in honor of those who give their lives daily, not in death, but in a service so complete it demands the sacrifice of identity itself. Some names belong on the wall, others belong in the silence behind it, keeping watch, guarding the space so no more names need be added, because not all legends vanish. Some return exactly when they're needed most. They walk back onto the tarmac without a sound, their presence steady, their purpose unwavering. They come home, not for glory, but to protect the ones still learning what it truly means to serve. If you believe that real legends don't disappear, that they return when duty calls, then you already understand, because the bravest heroes aren't always seen, but they are always there.